What happens when the most feared queen in the realm faces a knight brave enough to defy her direct orders? Queen Morgana of Astoria had built her reputation on one unbreakable rule: absolute obedience or absolute banishment. For 7 years, no knight had dared challenge her authority and lived to tell about it. But when Sir Roderick chose mercy over orders, he triggered a chain of events that would test everything both of them believed about loyalty, justice, and the true meaning of service to the crown. This isn't just another story about royal authority versus individual conscience. This is the incredible tale of how one act of defiance led to a 3-year exile, a dangerous conspiracy, and the most unlikely partnership in medieval history. A story that proves sometimes the greatest loyalty comes from those brave enough to disobey when conscience demands it. Today I'm going to tell you how a banished knight's return with shocking evidence saved not just his own life, but an entire kingdom from destruction. How a queen who tolerated no disobedience learned that her greatest strength lay in the counsel of the one man who dared to defy her. But first, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? I love seeing our global community grow. And if you're ready for a story that shows how apparent enemies can become the strongest allies, how exile can lead to redemption, and how the courage to do what's right can change the fate of kingdoms, smash that like button and subscribe with notifications on. Because what Sir Roderick discovered during his years of exile will prove that sometimes the most dangerous truth is the one that saves your life. Are you ready to witness how defiance became loyalty and banishment became salvation? Queen Morgana stood before the assembled knights in the grand throne room of Ravenspire Castle, her piercing blue eyes scanning each armored figure with the cold precision of a predator evaluating potential threats. At 31, she had ruled the kingdom of Astoria for 7 years following the unexpected death of her husband, King Aldric, and in that time had earned a reputation as one of the most formidable monarchs in the known world. Her beauty was legendary: flowing raven-black hair, alabaster skin, and features that seemed carved from marble. But it was her ruthless intelligence and unwavering determination that had secured her throne against numerous challenges from ambitious nobles who believed a woman had no business ruling a warrior kingdom. The ornate throne room was filled with the cream of Astoria's military elite, 50 knights who had sworn sacred oaths of loyalty and obedience to the crown. These were not mere ceremonial guards but battle-hardened warriors who had proven themselves in countless campaigns against the kingdom's enemies. Yet despite their proven valor and noble bloodlines, they stood before their queen with the careful respect of men who understood that her mercy was as rare as it was precious, and that her wrath could end careers, exile families, or in extreme cases, cost lives. "My lords," Queen Morgana began, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from absolute power exercised without hesitation. "Recent events have made it necessary for me to remind you all of certain fundamental truths about duty, obedience, and the consequences of defying royal commands. Some among you seem to have forgotten that my word is not a suggestion to be debated or a recommendation to be considered. It is law, absolute and inviolable." The tension in the room was palpable as the knights exchanged subtle glances, each wondering who among their number had earned the queen's displeasure and what punishment was about to be delivered. Queen Morgana's reputation for dealing harshly with disobedience was well established, and several empty places in the ranks served as silent reminders of knights who had been stripped of their titles, banished from the kingdom, or in one memorable case, executed for treason when their defiance crossed the line into outright rebellion. "Sir Roderick of Thornfield," the queen called out, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Step forward and account for your actions during last month's campaign against the border raiders." Her eyes fixed on a tall, broad-shouldered knight in his early 30s whose weathered face bore the scars of numerous battles and whose reputation for courage was matched only by his occasionally troublesome tendency to question orders that he deemed unwise or unnecessarily cruel. Sir Roderick moved forward with the steady gait of a man who had faced death countless times and found it less frightening than the disappointed stare of a queen whose approval he had somehow lost. "Your Majesty," he said, removing his helm and kneeling before the throne with a proper deference, "I await your judgment and accept full responsibility for any failures in my conduct during the recent campaign." Queen Morgana rose from her throne, descending the marble steps with deliberate slowness that allowed the weight of the moment to settle over the assembled knights like a shroud. "Sir Roderick, you were given explicit orders to burn the village of Millbrook and execute all adult males as an example to other communities that might consider harboring raiders. Instead, you chose to ignore these commands and allowed the villagers to flee with their possessions and their lives intact. Explain to me why you believed your judgment superior to that of your queen." The accusation hung in the air like a sword suspended over Roderick's neck, and every knight in the room understood that they were witnessing a moment that would define not just one man's fate but the very nature of their relationship with their sovereign. The campaign against the border raiders had been successful in military terms, but Queen Morgana's strategy had involved tactics that many considered unnecessarily harsh, designed more to terrorize potential rebels into submission than to achieve specific military objectives. "Your Majesty," Sir Roderick replied, his voice steady despite the gravity of his situation, "I found the village empty of raiders and occupied only by women, children, and elderly farmers who showed no signs of having aided our enemies. My investigation revealed that the raiders had forced them to provide supplies under threat of violence, and I determined that executing innocent people would serve no strategic purpose while damaging our reputation for just governance." The explanation was delivered with the straightforward honesty of a man who had weighed his options carefully and chosen what he believed to be the morally correct course of action, even knowing that it would likely result in severe consequences. Around the throne room, other knights found themselves remembering similar moments when they had faced the choice between absolute obedience and personal conscience, and wondering whether they would have shown the same courage that Roderick was displaying now. Queen Morgana's expression remained unreadable as she processed his words, her brilliant mind calculating not just the immediate implications of his disobedience but the broader message that her response would send to every knight, noble, and subject in the kingdom. "Sir Roderick," she said finally, "your explanation reveals that you made a deliberate choice to place your personal moral convictions above the explicit commands of your sovereign. This is not a question of battlefield tactics or strategic necessity. It is a fundamental challenge to the principle of royal authority that forms the foundation of our entire system of governance." The silence that followed Queen Morgana's words was so complete that the only sound in the vast throne room was the subtle whisper of wind through the high windows and the barely audible breathing of 50 armored men who dared not move for fear of drawing the Queen's attention to themselves. Sir Roderick remained kneeling, his head bowed in the traditional posture of submission, but his shoulders were set with the quiet dignity of a man who had acted according to his conscience and was prepared to accept whatever consequences might follow. "Stand, Sir Roderick," Queen Morgana commanded, and as he rose to his full height, she studied him with the calculating gaze of a chess master contemplating a particularly complex move. "Your reputation for courage and skill in battle is beyond question, as is your previous record of loyal service to the crown. These factors weigh in your favor and prevent me from ordering your immediate execution for defying royal commands. However, your disobedience cannot be overlooked or forgiven without consequence, lest other knights begin to believe that they too may pick and choose which orders to follow." The assembled knights held their collective breath as they waited to learn what form the Queen's punishment would take. Some expected imprisonment, others anticipated the confiscation of lands and titles, and a few wondered if they might witness the kind of creative retribution that had made Queen Morgana's justice legendary throughout the region for its memorability and its effectiveness in deterring future transgressions. "You have placed me in an impossible position, Sir Roderick," the Queen continued, beginning to pace before the throne with the restless energy of a caged predator. "If I punish you harshly for showing mercy to innocent people, I risk appearing tyrannical and cruel to my subjects. If I show you leniency for disobeying direct orders, I undermine the discipline that keeps this kingdom strong and united. You have forced me to choose between appearing weak or appearing monstrous, and I find myself deeply displeased with both options." Sir Roderick found his voice, speaking with the careful respect of a man walking through a field of hidden traps. "Your Majesty, I never intended to place you in such a position. My only thought was to serve the kingdom's best interests while minimizing unnecessary harm to innocent people. If my actions have created difficulties for your rule, I deeply regret that consequence of what I believed to be right and necessary decisions. Queen Morgana stopped pacing and fixed him with a stare that seemed to peer directly into his soul, evaluating not just his words but the motivations behind them and the character that had driven him to risk everything for the sake of people he barely knew. "Tell me, Sir Roderick, do you believe that your judgment is superior to mine? Do you think that your years of military experience give you the right to overrule the decisions of your sovereign when those decisions conflict with your personal moral code?" The question was clearly a trap, designed to force him into either admitting arrogance that would justify severe punishment or denying his convictions in a way that would compromise his integrity and personal honor. Sir Roderick considered his response carefully, understanding that his next words would determine not just his own fate but potentially influence the way Queen Morgana dealt with future challenges to her authority. "Your Majesty, I do not presume to claim that my judgment is superior to yours in matters of statecraft, diplomacy, or overall strategy. However, I do believe that officers in the field must sometimes make tactical decisions based on immediate circumstances that may not have been anticipated when original orders were given. In this specific case, I judged that the strategic objectives of the campaign could be achieved without harming innocent people, and I acted accordingly." His answer was diplomatically phrased but still represented a fundamental assertion that individual conscience could sometimes override absolute obedience, a position that struck at the heart of Queen Morgana's system of governance. Around the throne room, other knights found themselves silently debating whether they agreed with Roderick's stance and whether they would have the courage to act similarly if faced with comparable moral dilemmas. Queen Morgana nodded slowly, as if his response had confirmed something she had already suspected about his character and his fundamental nature. "Sir Roderick, your honesty is commendable, even when that honesty works against your own interests. You have essentially admitted that you believe there are circumstances under which personal conscience should override royal authority, a position that makes you unsuitable for service in my guard regardless of your military skills or personal courage." The words fell like hammer blows, and Sir Roderick felt his stomach drop as he realized that his military career was about to end in disgrace and exile. Around him, fellow knights who had served alongside him for years struggled to maintain their composure as they watched a respected colleague face the destruction of everything he had worked to build throughout his adult life. "Therefore," Queen Morgana announced, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast chamber, "I hereby strip you of your rank, your titles, and your lands. You are banished from the kingdom of Astoria, never to return upon pain of death. You have until sunset tomorrow to gather your personal possessions and depart our borders forever. Guards will escort you to ensure that you do not attempt to contact family members or allies who might be foolish enough to aid a condemned exile." The sentence was delivered with the cold finality of absolute royal authority, but as Sir Roderick absorbed the full impact of what had just happened to him, he noticed something unexpected in Queen Morgana's eyes. Not satisfaction or vindictive pleasure, but what almost looked like regret, as if she were punishing him not because she wanted to, but because she felt she had no choice that would preserve her authority and the stability of her rule. 3 years later, the morning mist clung to the battlements of Ravenspire Castle, as Queen Morgana reviewed the intelligence reports that had been arriving with increasing frequency over the past several weeks. The documents spread across her private study painted a disturbing picture of growing instability throughout the region, with several neighboring kingdoms showing signs of unusual military activity and diplomatic communications that suggested coordinated planning for some kind of major campaign. Her network of spies and informants had detected troop movements, secret meetings between hostile rulers, and the kind of covert preparations that typically preceded large-scale military action. The Queen's personal study was a sanctuary of dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and maps that covered entire walls with meticulous detail about every aspect of her kingdom and its neighbors. It was here that she conducted the most sensitive business of statecraft, away from the prying eyes and listening ears that were inevitable in a royal court filled with ambitious nobles who would use any advantage to advance their own interests. The room reflected her personality, organized, efficient, and designed to facilitate the kind of deep strategic thinking that had kept her kingdom strong despite constant external pressures. "Your Majesty," Sir Marcus, the current captain of the Royal Guard, announced from the doorway, "there is a messenger at the gates requesting immediate audience with you. He claims to carry information of vital importance to the kingdom's security, but he refuses to reveal his identity or the nature of his message to anyone other than yourself." His tone carried the professional caution of a man who had learned to be suspicious of unexpected visitors, especially during times of political tension. Queen Morgana looked up from the intelligence reports, her brilliant mind immediately cataloging the possible implications of such a request. Anonymous messengers bearing urgent information could be anything from desperate allies seeking help to enemy agents attempting to gather intelligence, or even assassins using deception to gain access to their target. The timing was particularly suspicious, coming as it did when her spies were already reporting unusual activity that suggested coordinated action against her kingdom. "Describe this messenger, Sir Marcus," she commanded, setting aside the documents and giving her full attention to this new development. "What can you tell me about his appearance, his equipment, his manner of speech? Does he bear any identifying marks or symbols that might reveal his origins or allegiances?" Sir Marcus consulted the notes he had taken during his brief interaction with the mysterious visitor. "He appears to be a knight or former knight, Your Majesty, based on his bearing and the quality of his equipment. He is travel-worn and clearly has journeyed far to reach us, but his armor and weapons are well maintained and of excellent craftsmanship. He speaks with the accent of our own region, suggesting local origins, but there is something about his manner that suggests he has spent considerable time abroad. Most unusually, he wears no heraldic symbols or identifying marks of any kind." The description triggered a memory that Queen Morgana had been trying to suppress for 3 years, but she forced herself to consider the possibility objectively rather than emotionally. A knight with local origins who had spent time abroad, arriving at precisely the moment when her kingdom faced potential threats from multiple directions. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental, and yet too dangerous to ignore if the information he carried was genuinely important. "Have him searched for weapons and brought to the secondary audience chamber under heavy guard," Queen Morgana decided after a moment of consideration. "I will meet with him there, but prepare for the possibility that this is some kind of trap or deception. Station additional guards throughout the castle and ensure that our most sensitive documents are secured in case this proves to be a more elaborate intelligence operation than it appears." The secondary audience chamber was smaller and more intimate than the grand throne room, but it was also easier to secure and monitor. Queen Morgana entered the room wearing a gown of deep burgundy silk that complemented her raven-black hair and pale skin, but she also wore a concealed dagger and had positioned guards where they could respond instantly to any threat. She settled into the ornate chair that served as an informal throne, arranging herself with a kind of regal composure that had intimidated foreign ambassadors and rebellious nobles for years. When the doors opened and the mysterious messenger was escorted into the chamber, Queen Morgana felt her breath catch in her throat despite her preparation for this possibility. Sir Roderick of Thornfield stood before her, 3 years older and bearing the marks of hard travel and difficult experiences, but unmistakably the same man she had banished for disobeying her orders. His armor was indeed well maintained but showed signs of recent battles, and his face bore new scars that spoke of challenges faced and overcome during his years of exile. "Your Majesty," Sir Roderick said, dropping to one knee with the same respectful deference he had shown 3 years earlier, "I have returned not to beg for forgiveness or to request restoration of my titles, but to warn you of a threat to your kingdom that I believe you are not yet aware of. I know that my presence here violates the terms of my banishment, and I accept that speaking to you may cost me my life, but the information I carry is too important to trust to intermediaries or anonymous messages." Queen Morgana struggled to maintain her composure as conflicting emotions warred within her chest. Anger at his violation of her explicit commands, curiosity about the information he claimed to possess, and something else that she refused to acknowledge even to herself. A feeling that might have been relief at seeing him alive, and apparently well after 3 years of wondering what had become of the knight whose conscience had proven stronger than his obedience to royal authority. "Sir Roderick," she said, her voice carefully controlled to reveal nothing of her internal state, "you were banished from this kingdom on pain of death. Your presence here is a capital offense regardless of whatever information you believe you possess. Give me one reason why I should not have you executed immediately for defying my explicit commands once again." Sir Roderick raised his head to meet Queen Morgana's gaze directly, and she saw in his brown eyes the same unwavering conviction that had led to his banishment 3 years earlier. But there was something else there now. a depth of experience and a weight of knowledge that spoke of hardships endured and wisdom gained through trial by fire. His voice when he spoke carried the quiet authority of a man who had seen enough of the world to understand the true scope of the dangers they faced. Your Majesty, 3 months ago I was serving as a mercenary captain in the employ of Duke Aldwin of Blackmore, when I uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that threatens not just your kingdom but the entire balance of power in this region. 5 neighboring rulers have entered into a secret alliance with the specific goal of deposing you and dividing your territories among themselves. They believe that a kingdom ruled by a woman, no matter how capable, represents a dangerous precedent that must be eliminated before other women begin to claim similar authority. The accusation was so serious and specific that Queen Morgana found herself leaning forward despite her determination to maintain emotional distance from her former knight. If what he was saying was true, then she faced not just external military threats but a coordinated campaign designed to destroy everything she had built and fought to preserve. The implications were staggering: years of careful diplomacy undermined, military strategies rendered obsolete, and the very survival of her rule hanging in the balance. "You speak of evidence, Sir Roderick," Queen Morgana said, her voice sharp with the kind of focused intensity that had made her legendary among those who served her. "What proof do you possess of these remarkable claims? Why should I believe accusations from a banished knight who has already demonstrated his willingness to defy royal authority when it suits his purposes?" Sir Roderick reached slowly into his traveling pack, moving with deliberate care to avoid alarming the guards who had their hands on their weapons and their eyes fixed on his every motion. He withdrew a leather portfolio bound with multiple ribbons and sealed with several different wax impressions, handling it with the reverence due to something of immense value and importance. "These documents were stolen from Duke Aldwin's private study during my final night in his service," Sir Roderick explained as he placed the portfolio on the floor before the Queen's chair. "They include the original treaty signed by all 5 conspirators, detailed plans for the invasion of your kingdom, correspondence outlining how your territories will be divided after your defeat, and most damning of all, a list of nobles within your own court who have agreed to provide assistance when the attack begins." The revelation that there were traitors within her own court struck Queen Morgana like a physical blow, challenging her confidence in her ability to judge character and protect herself from those closest to her. She had always known that ruling as a woman required constant vigilance against those who would use any sign of weakness to challenge her authority, but the idea that some of her own nobles were actively working with foreign enemies to destroy her was almost too terrible to contemplate. "Furthermore," Sir Roderick continued, "I have spent the past 3 months traveling through the territories of your enemies, observing their military preparations and gathering intelligence about their capabilities, strategies, and timeline for attack. The invasion is planned for the harvest season, when your forces will be scattered throughout the kingdom protecting agricultural communities, and your treasury will be at its lowest point of the year." Queen Morgana gestured for the guards to retrieve the documents and bring them to her for examination, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was learning. As she broke the seals and began to review the contents of the portfolio, her face grew increasingly pale as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. The level of detail in the planning documents suggested months or even years of preparation, while the list of domestic collaborators included names that shocked her with their prominence and their apparent trustworthiness. "These signatures appear to be genuine," she said after several minutes of careful examination, "and the information contained in these documents is too specific and detailed to be fabricated. If this intelligence is accurate, then I face the most serious threat to my rule since I first claimed the throne 7 years ago." She looked up at Sir Roderick with new respect and something that might have been gratitude. "How did you come to possess such dangerous information, and why are you risking your life to bring it to me?" Sir Roderick's expression grew somber as he prepared to explain the events that had led to his discovery of the conspiracy and his decision to risk everything to warn the woman who had exiled him. "During my years of service as a mercenary, I made it a practice to gather information about the political situations in regions where I worked, both to assess the stability of my employment and to identify potential opportunities for advancement. Duke Aldwin trusted me because of my reputation and my apparent lack of connection to any regional power structure, but he underestimated my loyalty to my homeland." The Queen felt something stir in her chest at his words. Not just political calculation about the value of his intelligence, but a personal recognition that this man had chosen to risk his life for the sake of a kingdom that had rejected him and a queen who had cast him out. The complexity of her emotions was troubling, but she forced herself to focus on the immediate practical implications of what he had revealed. "Sir Roderick," Queen Morgana said slowly, "if this information proves accurate and enables me to defend my kingdom successfully, then you will have performed a service of incalculable value. However, your return to my lands still violates the terms of your banishment, and I cannot simply ignore that transgression without undermining the authority of royal law. I find myself once again in the position of having to balance competing principles: justice, mercy, practical necessity, and the preservation of royal authority." Sir Roderick nodded, understanding the difficult position that his return had created for the queen he had once served with such devotion. "Your Majesty, I knew when I decided to return that I was risking my life for the slim chance that my information might help protect the kingdom I still love despite my exile. I ask for no forgiveness, no restoration of rank or lands, and no mercy beyond the opportunity to serve in whatever capacity you deem appropriate during the crisis ahead. If you judge that my death is necessary to preserve royal law, then I accept that decision with the same respect I have always shown for your authority." Queen Morgana rose from her chair and began to pace the chamber, her mind racing as she processed not just the intelligence that Sir Roderick had brought but the larger implications of his return and the choices she now faced. The documents he had provided were detailed enough to allow her to verify their authenticity through her own intelligence networks, and if they proved accurate, she would need to act quickly and decisively to counter the conspiracy before it could achieve its objectives. But first, she had to decide what to do about the man who had violated her banishment to bring her this crucial information. "Leave us," she commanded the guards, her voice carrying the absolute authority that had never failed to secure immediate obedience. "Wait outside the chamber and allow no one to enter without my explicit permission." The guards hesitated briefly, clearly uncomfortable with leaving their queen alone with a man who had been officially branded as an exile and potential enemy, but her sharp glance convinced them to withdraw without further protest. When they were alone, Queen Morgana stopped pacing and turned to face Sir Roderick directly, allowing her carefully maintained royal composure to slip slightly as she grappled with emotions that she had been suppressing for 3 years. "Roderick," she said, using his name without title for the first time since his banishment, "I need you to understand something before we proceed further. Your exile was not just about your disobedience at Millbrook, though that was certainly the immediate cause. It was about the impossible position you placed me in by forcing me to choose between appearing weak or appearing tyrannical." Sir Roderick remained kneeling but raised his head to meet her gaze, seeing in her eyes a vulnerability that she had never allowed herself to show during his years of service. "Your Majesty, I have had 3 years to reflect on my actions and their consequences. I understand now that my decision to prioritize mercy over obedience created political problems that extended far beyond the immediate situation at Millbrook. I have never ceased to regret the difficulties my actions caused for your rule. The irony," Queen Morgana continued, "is that your moral conviction, while inconvenient for royal authority, was not necessarily wrong. The intelligence reports I received after your exile confirmed that Millbrook had indeed been coerced into providing supplies to the raiders rather than willingly collaborating with them. Your assessment of the situation was accurate, and your decision to show mercy was probably the correct one from both moral and practical standpoints." The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge across the chasm that had separated them for 3 years, acknowledging truths that had been impossible to speak when political necessity had demanded his punishment regardless of the righteousness of his actions. Sir Roderick felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly as he realized that his exile had not been based on genuine disagreement with his decision, but on the Queen's need to maintain the appearance of absolute authority. "However," Queen Morgana continued, "understanding your motivations and even agreeing with your moral reasoning does not change the fact that royal authority depends on the perception that royal commands are absolute and inviolable. If I had excused your disobedience, no matter how well-intentioned, it would have encouraged other knights to substitute their judgment for mine whenever they disagreed with my orders. The stability of the entire kingdom depends on maintaining that principle." Sir Roderick nodded, recognizing the political logic that had driven her decision even as he appreciated her willingness to acknowledge the moral complexity of the situation. "Your Majesty, I have never questioned the necessity of your decision from the perspective of royal governance. My only regret is that my actions forced you into a position where you had to choose between competing principles, both of which were important to the welfare of the kingdom. Queen Morgana moved closer to where he knelt, studying his face with the intensity of someone trying to read the soul behind the eyes. Tell me truthfully, Roderick, do you still believe that personal conscience should sometimes override royal authority? Has your experience in exile changed your perspective on the balance between obedience and moral conviction? The question struck to the heart of the philosophical conflict that had defined their relationship and ultimately led to his banishment. Sir Roderick considered his response carefully, understanding that his answer would determine not just his immediate fate but the possibility of any future reconciliation between them. Your Majesty, my years in exile have shown me the chaos that results when authority is weak or absent, and I have gained new appreciation for the value of strong central leadership in maintaining order and justice. However, I cannot honestly claim that my fundamental beliefs about the relationship between conscience and obedience have changed. I still believe that there are circumstances where moral law must take precedence over human law, even when that choice carries severe personal consequences. Queen Morgana had expected this answer, but hearing it confirmed still created a complex mixture of frustration and admiration in her chest. His unwavering moral conviction was simultaneously the quality that made him most valuable as a counselor and most dangerous as a subordinate, a paradox that she had been unable to resolve 3 years earlier and found no easier to handle now. Then we remain at an impasse, she said softly, because I cannot tolerate knights who place their personal judgment above royal authority, no matter how noble their motivations might be. Yet I also cannot ignore the service you have performed in bringing me this intelligence, nor can I pretend that your moral courage is not precisely the quality that enabled you to risk everything to warn me of this conspiracy. Sir Roderick rose slowly to his feet, understanding that they had reached a crucial moment that would determine the course of both their futures. Your Majesty, perhaps there is a solution that serves both your need for absolute authority and my inability to suppress my conscience entirely. Allow me to serve not as a knight bound by oaths of obedience, but as an independent agent who can provide counsel and assistance without the formal obligations that create conflicts between duty and conviction. The proposal was unprecedented in the formal structure of royal service, but Queen Morgana found herself intrigued by the possibility of finding a way to utilize his unique combination of moral courage, military skill, and demonstrated loyalty to the kingdom without recreating the impossible conflicts that had led to his original exile. Queen Morgana spent the next 3 days verifying the intelligence that Sir Roderick had provided, dispatching her most trusted spies to confirm details and cross-reference information with her existing intelligence networks. Each report that returned confirmed another aspect of the conspiracy, painting an increasingly clear picture of a coordinated threat that was more immediate and dangerous than she had initially realized. The planned invasion was scheduled to begin in less than 2 months, and several of the domestic collaborators identified in the stolen documents held positions that would allow them to sabotage the kingdom's defenses from within. During these same 3 days, Sir Roderick remained in the castle as an unofficial guest under informal house arrest, guarded but treated with the courtesy due to someone whose information might prove vital to the kingdom's survival. Queen Morgana found herself visiting him more frequently than was strictly necessary for their official consultations, drawn by a combination of practical need for his intelligence about enemy capabilities and personal curiosity about the experiences that had shaped him during his years of exile. The documents mention a coordinated naval assault in addition to the overland invasion, Queen Morgana said during one of their evening meetings in her private study. Your knowledge of Duke Aldwin's forces suggests that you may have observed preparations for this maritime component. What can you tell me about their naval capabilities and likely targets? Sir Roderick spread several maps across the table, pointing to specific coastal locations with the confidence of someone who had personally observed the military preparations he was describing. Duke Aldwin has been constructing a fleet of shallow-draft warships specifically designed for amphibious operations against coastal fortifications. Based on my observations of their design and armament, their primary targets will likely be the fishing villages that provide much of the kingdom's food supply during winter months. The strategic implications were immediately clear to Queen Morgana, who had spent years studying military history and understanding the vulnerabilities that came with ruling a kingdom dependent on both agricultural production and maritime trade. An attack on the coastal food supply would force her to choose between defending the capital and protecting the communities that fed her people, while also stretching her limited naval forces across too many potential targets. However, Sir Roderick continued, there may be an opportunity to turn their strategy against them. The shallow draft design that makes their ships effective for coastal raids also makes them vulnerable to attack by deeper draft vessels in open water. If we could force them to engage our fleet before they reached the coast, we might be able to eliminate the naval threat entirely. Queen Morgana leaned over the maps, studying the tactical possibilities that his suggestion opened up. That would require accurate intelligence about their departure schedule and route, as well as the ability to position our fleet for an intercept without alerting them to our knowledge of their plans. Do you believe such an operation would be feasible? More than feasible, Your Majesty, Sir Roderick replied with growing excitement as the tactical possibilities became clear. I maintained contact with several individuals within Duke Aldwin's organization who could provide the necessary intelligence about timing and routes. Furthermore, the very secrecy that makes their conspiracy dangerous also makes it fragile. They cannot adjust their plans quickly to respond to unexpected developments without risking exposure through increased communications. Their conversation continued late into the night, ranging across military strategy, diplomatic possibilities, and the complex logistics of defending a kingdom against multiple coordinated threats. Queen Morgana found herself impressed once again by the depth of Sir Roderick's strategic thinking and his ability to synthesize information from multiple sources into coherent plans of action. More troubling was her growing awareness of how much she had missed having someone she could trust completely to provide honest counsel without regard for personal advancement or political advantage. Roderick, she said as their meeting concluded, I have made a decision about your status and your future service to the crown. Your formal banishment will remain in effect. I cannot set aside royal law without undermining the principle of royal authority that holds this kingdom together. However, I am prepared to offer you an unofficial role as my personal agent for special assignments that require someone with your particular combination of skills and moral flexibility. Sir Roderick felt his heart leap at the possibility of redemption and renewed service, but he forced himself to consider the implications carefully before responding. Your Majesty, such an arrangement would allow me to serve the kingdom I love while avoiding the conflicts between conscience and formal obedience that led to our previous difficulties. However, it would also place me in a position outside the normal structures of law and accountability. Are you certain that such an arrangement would serve your interests and the kingdom's welfare? Queen Morgana smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth he had seen from her since his return. Roderick, one of the things I have learned during my years of rule is that sometimes the most valuable servants are those who cannot be easily controlled or predicted. Your moral conviction makes you unsuitable for formal military command, but it also makes you uniquely valuable for missions where personal judgment and ethical flexibility are more important than blind obedience to orders. The arrangement they negotiated over the following hours was unlike anything in the formal structure of royal service, but it provided a framework for utilizing Sir Roderick's unique capabilities while avoiding the philosophical conflicts that had made his previous service untenable. He would serve as Queen Morgana's personal agent for special missions, reporting directly to her and operating with broad discretionary authority to achieve objectives through whatever means his conscience would allow. Their first collaboration would be the defense against the conspiracy he had uncovered, but both understood that if it proved successful, it might establish a new model for the relationship between royal authority and individual moral conviction that could benefit the kingdom for years to come. As Sir Roderick prepared to leave her study and begin implementing their plans for countering the invasion, Queen Morgana called him back with a final thought. Roderick, she said softly, I want you to know that your banishment was one of the most difficult decisions I have ever made as queen. While I stand by its necessity at the time, I have often wondered whether there might have been another way to resolve our conflict without losing your service entirely. Perhaps this new arrangement will allow us to find that better path. 6 months later, Queen Morgana stood on the battlements of Ravenspire Castle, watching the sun set over a kingdom that had survived its greatest crisis through a combination of intelligence, strategic planning, and the kind of unconventional thinking that formal military doctrine rarely accommodated. The conspiracy that Sir Roderick had uncovered had been systematically dismantled through a series of operations that had eliminated the external threat while exposing and neutralizing the domestic collaborators who had betrayed their oaths of loyalty. The decisive moment had come when Sir Roderick's intelligence network provided exact timing for the naval component of the invasion, allowing Queen Morgana's fleet to intercept and destroy the enemy ships before they could reach the coast. Simultaneously, coordinated strikes against the overland invasion forces had caught them unprepared and scattered, while the exposure of domestic traitors had allowed for their arrest before they could sabotage the kingdom's defenses from within. Sir Roderick approached along the battlements, moving with the quiet confidence of a man who had found his proper place in the world after years of uncertainty and exile. His role as the Queen's personal agent had proven remarkably effective, allowing him to operate with the moral flexibility he required while serving the kingdom's interests with unprecedented success. The arrangement had created a new model for royal service that other monarchs were already beginning to study and emulate. "Your Majesty," he said as he joined her at the stone railing, "the final reports from our operations against the conspiracy have been compiled. All 5 of the enemy rulers involved have either been captured or killed, their armies have been disbanded, and their territories have been redistributed among loyal allies. The domestic traitors have been tried and punished according to their crimes, and new safeguards have been implemented to prevent similar infiltration in the future." Queen Morgana nodded, satisfied with the thoroughness of their victory but also contemplative about the larger lessons that could be drawn from their experience. "The success of our operations demonstrates the value of combining traditional royal authority with unconventional approaches to problem-solving. Your unique position outside formal command structures allowed you to develop intelligence and implement strategies that would have been impossible through normal military channels." "More importantly," Sir Roderick replied, "it has shown that apparent conflicts between royal authority and individual conscience can sometimes be resolved through creative arrangements that serve both principles. Our collaboration has strengthened rather than weakened your rule while allowing me to serve according to my moral convictions." The observation touched on the philosophical evolution that both of them had undergone during their months of working together to save the kingdom. Queen Morgana had learned that absolute authority could coexist with moral flexibility when properly structured, while Sir Roderick had discovered that serving his conscience and serving his queen were not necessarily incompatible objectives. "I have been considering a more formal recognition of your contributions," Queen Morgana said, turning to face him directly. "While your official banishment must remain in effect to preserve the principle of royal law, I believe your service as my personal agent deserves acknowledgement that reflects its importance to the kingdom's security and prosperity." Sir Roderick felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words, understanding that she was offering not just professional recognition but personal acceptance of the path they had forged together. "Your Majesty, the opportunity to serve the kingdom in a capacity that honors both your authority and my convictions is reward enough. I ask for nothing more than the continued trust you have shown in allowing me to operate as your agent." "Nevertheless," Queen Morgana continued with a slight smile, "I have decided to create a new position within the royal household, Special Advisor for Extraordinary Circumstances. The role would be yours permanently, with a residence within the castle, a generous stipend, and formal recognition of your service to the crown. Your banishment would remain technically in effect, but you would be granted a permanent exception that allows you to serve in this special capacity." The offer represented everything that Sir Roderick could have hoped for when he made the desperate decision to return from exile with intelligence about the conspiracy. More than restoration of rank or lands, it provided a way for him to serve the woman and the kingdom he loved while maintaining the moral integrity that defined his character. "I accept your offer with gratitude and renewed dedication to your service," Sir Roderick replied formally, then added more personally, "Morgana, I want you to know that these months of working together have shown me that my exile, while painful, was necessary for both of us to grow into the people we needed to become. Your rule has grown stronger and more flexible, while my understanding of true service has deepened beyond what I ever thought possible." Queen Morgana stepped closer, allowing her royal composure to soften as she acknowledged the personal bond that had developed alongside their professional partnership. "Roderick, when I banished you 3 years ago, I believed I was losing one of my most valuable knights to an irreconcilable conflict between duty and conscience. Instead, your exile and return have given me something far more precious. A counselor whose loyalty is absolute precisely because it is freely chosen rather than formally commanded." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above their kingdom, Queen Morgana and Sir Roderick stood together on the battlements, looking out over lands that had been saved through their collaboration, and forward to a future where the apparent contradictions between authority and conscience had been resolved through mutual respect and creative thinking. Their story had become a legend that would inspire future generations of rulers and servants alike, proving that true loyalty sometimes required the courage to challenge authority, while wise authority sometimes required the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. The kingdom of Astoria entered a golden age under Queen Morgana's rule, strengthened by the knowledge that its security depended not just on blind obedience to royal commands but on the moral courage of individuals who were willing to risk everything for the sake of justice and truth. Sir Roderick's unique position as special advisor for extraordinary circumstances became a model that other kingdoms adopted, creating a new understanding of how personal conscience and royal authority could work together rather than in opposition. Years later, when scholars wrote about the reign of Queen Morgana the Wise, they would identify the crisis of the Great Conspiracy as the turning point when traditional monarchy evolved into something more flexible and more powerful, a system that honored both the necessity of central authority and the importance of individual moral conviction. The banished knight who returned with proof had not just saved a kingdom, he had helped create a new model of governance that would influence political development for centuries to come. Their partnership continued for many years, through numerous crises and challenges that tested both the kingdom's strength and their personal bond. Queen Morgana never married, finding in her special advisor the kind of intellectual partnership and emotional support that she had never expected to discover in anyone, let alone a man she had once exiled for disobedience. Sir Roderick never sought restoration of his formal titles, content to serve in a capacity that allowed him to honor both his queen and his conscience without compromise.